Such a beautiful day today here in Chengdu in September. I think it's about 28 degrees or maybe even 30. It's pretty good. So here we have the Erying Ryzen 9 7940HX mobile on desktop motherboard. Sorry about the mess, I'm testing it with a 1000 watt power supply. No GPU, just SSD. And let's get right into it with the BIOS settings. So here we are, this is the September version of the BIOS. Unfortunately we cannot see the memory frequency here, which means that if you want to test, you need to boot into either MATX or some operation system. We start with the memory, and this motherboard can only support 6000 MHz DDR5 memory with the current BIOS. So I guess it's not really worth it to get the memory any faster. So you can do the Expo XMP overclocking, but it didn't really work for me so well. So you can do it here, just enable it and choose the profile, but actually the profile is not even accurate for me. So instead I will do it myself and just select the memory speed to be 6000, and then for the timings it actually need to be written in hexadecimal format. So you will need to use an online converter or just do it in your head. I think it's quite difficult to convert from decimal into hexadecimal format. So my memory is rated at CL38, but with some testing I managed to boot and test with MATX 64 at CL36 and it was stable. So you can either look up your SPD and details in CPU-Z and fill it out accordingly, or you can do and test yourself and just reduce the latency, reduce the timings, and then test it one by one. That's what I did, and then I came up with that CL36 it equals 24 in hexadecimal format, and the other two numbers, the TRCD and TRP, I got 41, which was still stable, which is 29 in hexadecimal format, and TRES with my testing, and it seems like it doesn't really change anything, but I think a good rule of thumb is just add up these first two numbers in decimal format and then convert it to hexadecimal. So it's like, in my case it's 36 plus 41, which is 77, and then I convert that to hex, and that's gonna be 4D. And the rest you can play around with, but it doesn't really gonna help your latency much. My experience, it would be nice to change TREFE, but that option is not really available here as far as I know. So that's pretty much it. Then we have to go back and go to the chipset. It's really unfortunate to have these settings all around, and I change everything at 1.35 volts based on my memory specifications, but you can go higher if you want to do more overclocking. It depends on your die, like SK Hynix M and A die are really good, and you can go like 1.4 1.45 volts, and you should also set the same here. That's about it. It seems like there are some settings here, but some of them don't really have anything. And then you can go back to advanced tab, and actually you can you can find a lot of things here as well at the AMD CBS, but we are focusing on AMD overclocking first. And you can find multiple settings at multiple locations, but I figured out it's best to set everything here first and go to Infinity Fabric. And because we have 6000 memory, that means actually it's 3000 megahertz. So our memory controller runs at 3000. So we can set UCL key and mem clock to 1-to-1 ratio, and then our Infinity Fabric will run 2-to-3 ratio with the UCL key. This is like quite standard for the 7000 and 9000 series CPUs. So because we are running at 3000 megahertz memory controller, it's 2000 megahertz for the Infinity Fabric, and this way we can get the best latencies for this platform. Let me just go back, and for Precision Boost Overdrive we set it to advanced. And here first we have some limits. I'm not sure if it does anything, but I realized this motherboard has some power limits, so I'm trying to turn off everything possible. And there is this scaler here for PBO. You can set something here. I tried and it didn't really change much, so I will keep it on auto, but feel free to try around. And what helped is setting the CPU post clock override to the as much as possible, which is basically if you want to try to set to 250 megahertz plus, it won't allow. So the maximum I could get is 200 megahertz plus, but you really need to check if your chip actually can run these higher clock speeds. I recommend trying with AIDA. I recommend to run some AIDA stress test and Cinebench to test the stability. And I would suggest to start lower first, maybe 100, and then increase. But in most cases, these laptop chips can do like 150 to 200 megahertz override. And for the curve optimizer, here you can undervolt per core or all the cores together. I figured it's easier to go with all the cores and make sure it's negative, so you reduce the voltages. This doesn't affect performance at all. This will just reduce the voltages and make your CPU run cooler. In the meanwhile, it can be unstable, so I recommend also to start with something like 15 or 20 and then gradually increase and test for stability. I also recommend for checking the scores for these settings, because sometimes if you set it too high, then you could impact performance. But eventually, like 30 is the maximum, so you cannot go 35. And in my experience, most of these chips, like 25, 30, they can still be stable and run the same performance without any impact. So I will keep it on 30 and then go back. And the last thing we will need to do is remove the power restrictions. So actually it's not here. I think that one is in AMD CBS. And then here SMU common options. Here there are a bunch of settings, and I think they all set the same things, so just make sure to set everything high. In my experience with this 7940 Ajax CPU, I get around 120 watts maximum. So it's better to set it even higher. I set to 150 watts, which is 150,000 milliwatts, and I set it at multiple locations, like this smart shift control, manual, enable it, and then set the same limit everywhere. And then PPT also here. I'm not sure which one actually changing the maximum, but without changing this, it will get a short boost of some higher watts, and then it will limit to 100 watts after some time. So it's better to increase these limits as much as you can. And interestingly, you can also set the Infinity Fabric frequency here, but let's leave it on auto because we already set it on the other settings. You also have a fan control here. I suggest not change it here, but I haven't really tried it yet. But here is another hardware monitor in these settings, and here you can set the CPU header and the system headers PWM output based on the temperatures. I found that the default settings are quite good, so I don't want to change that. There are a bunch of other options. I'm not sure what is changing what, but here just make sure in many cases you want the above 4G and resize bar support to be enabled. This is by default enabled here. Another interesting setting here somewhere is you can split the PCI Express outputs. I'm not sure where is it, but I saw it before. And lastly, if you use a GPU, I think it's better to set the NBIO GFX configuration, the iGPU. It's better to be disabled because if it's enabled, it's gonna use some of your system memory for VRAM for the iGPU. So unless you wanna use the HDMI outputs or the DisplayPort outputs on the motherboard and use the iGPU, if you don't want that, just turn it off, because then you will have more memory. You see, you also have DDR options here, and it's pretty much the same settings, but here it wasn't changed. But I think it's better if just change it at one place. So this was in AMD CBS, so we didn't change the DDR here, we just changed the DDR options in the overclocking menu. So this BIOS is a little bit messy, but you can access quite a lot of settings and it generally works well. So I think that's pretty much it. And if you think that your settings are good, you can just save as user defaults. Just make sure that your settings are stable. So test it with MATX and everything you can. Play some games, do some work, and then if it's stable, just save it and then you can restore it later. That's all about it. You can save it and